It begins, as so many medieval horrors do, not with the clash of swords or the roar of cavalry, but with silence. A cold, pale dawn spreads across the open plains of northern Europe, a place where armies have marched for generations, Romans, Franks, Saxons, Vikings, each leaving a trail of bones beneath the grass. The field looks peaceful from a distance, rolling green hills slick with morning dew, birds drifting overhead, the faint hiss of wind brushing through the tall stalks. But on this particular morning, something else moves beneath the grass, something man-made, something cruel. A scout from the mounted vanguard, an experienced rider, hardened by border skirmishes and brutal winters, guides his horse forward, testing the soil with each careful step. He is searching for enemy tracks, hidden ditches, perhaps a camouflaged archer. What he finds instead is the last sound he will ever hear, a sharp metallic snap, followed by the agonized scream of his horse. The animal collapses instantly. The scout is thrown into the grass, stunned, and before he can even rise to his knees, he sees them. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of tiny iron shapes glinting faintly, like malevolent stars scattered across the ground. They look like nothing at first, no bigger than a child's toy, but each is forged with wicked precision. 4 spikes arranged so that no matter how it falls, one always rises upward. A caltrop, a crow's foot. The smallest nightmare in the medieval arsenal. It is a weapon so deceptively simple that the first reaction of any man encountering it is disbelief. But disbelief quickly becomes fear, and fear soon becomes panic. Because the scout realizes, in that terrible moment, that these things, these scattered fangs of iron, are not the work of nature or accident. They are placed with intention, purpose, malice. His horse thrashes violently, each movement forcing the spike deeper. Blood spills fast, then faster. The scout tries to crawl toward the animal, but pain explodes through his hand, another caltrop, buried so cunningly in the earth that he never saw it. He tries to shout for help, but the wind steals his voice. By the time his comrades crest the ridge, the field is already beginning to wake, shimmering not with dew, but with the glimmer of metal. The men freeze. For the first time, the elite cavalry of this kingdom learns that the ground they trusted, the ground they depended on, has become the enemy. And the psychological effect is devastating. Because in medieval warfare, cavalry was the symbol of dominance. Knights with polished armor and destriers bred for war were the embodiment of wealth, power, nobility, and terror. Their charge could break formations, shatter morale, and end battles in minutes. But not here, not on this field, not when the very earth is turned into a minefield that predates gunpowder. The commander arrives, mounted on a warhorse clad in leather barding, his cloak fluttering behind him. He stares down at the twisted iron shapes with the same expression a man might wear when discovering vipers in his bed. He knows immediately what he sees, though he has encountered it only twice in all his campaigns. Caltrops, the hidden teeth of medieval battle. He signals his men to halt. No one dismounts. No one moves. The entire cavalry, hundreds of riders, sits trapped, held hostage by weapons small enough to fit in a child's palm, and so begins the silent war. The infantry behind the cavalry pushes forward, confused, irritated, unsure why the advance has stopped. But as they approach, the knights shout warnings. Don't step forward. It's the devil's nails. The ground is poisoned, yet the tension grows. Behind them, more soldiers arrive. Commanders argue. Messengers rush between wings of the army. And all the while the enemy, now fully aware that their trap has worked, waits patiently beyond the tree line, the perfect killing ground already prepared. This is the true genius of the caltrop. It doesn't need to kill. It only needs to delay, to cripple, to choke the momentum of an enemy force until strategy becomes chaos. In medieval warfare, time is just as deadly as steel. The cavalry commander dismounts carefully, placing his boots only on the patches of earth he knows are safe. He crouches beside one of the caltrops and studies it the way a scholar might study a strange artifact. The weapon is perfectly forged, each point honed to a needle, the angles precise, the iron darkened to blend with the soil. This is no crude iron scrap thrown together in haste. This is the work of a master. The realization hits him with a chill. Their enemy has metal workers who understand not only craftsmanship, but tactics. Men who have studied the gait of horses. Men who know exactly where cavalry must ride in order to break through formations. Men who have observed the landscape with such care that they could predict the exact path the enemy would take. This is warfare elevated into cold, deliberate calculus. But the story of the caltrop stretches far deeper, long before this battlefield and long before this war. Historians trace its origins across cultures: Rome, Persia, China. Anywhere horses ruled the battlefield, the caltrop followed like a shadow. It is an ancient idea reborn again and again because its brilliance is universal. One simple object that can defeat the mightiest weapon of its age. And here, on this European plain, in this moment of tense silence, that ancient idea has found new victims. The commander orders the infantry to bring wooden planks and shields to create a safe path. It will take hours. Hours they cannot spare. And when the planks are finally laid, when the men begin to move forward once more, the distant horns sound from the enemy lines. A counterattack. Arrows arc into the sky. Drums thunder from the woods. And out of the shadows comes the enemy infantry, fresh, disciplined, uninjured, while the cavalry is still pinned in place. The trap is complete. What follows is brutal, disorganized, and desperate. A battle in which the elite cavalry, the heart of the army, never even gets to charge. And as the soldiers fight and fall, as the screams echo across the plains, the caltrops lie silently beneath them, doing exactly what they were forged to do, dismantling an army from the feet upward. Not with glory, not with spectacle, but with inevitability. Of all the weapons born in the Middle Ages, this one is the smallest. But on this day, on this battlefield, it may be the most devastating, the first of 10 weapons so ruthless. It is a miracle that anyone survived long enough to tell the tale. If the caltrop is the smallest terror of the medieval battlefield, then the longbow is its thunderstorm, a force so vast, so overwhelming, that even kings learned to fear the sky itself. The story begins long before dawn, in a muddy encampment where men sleep wrapped in rough wool blankets, their hands curled naturally around the wooden staves that lie beside them. These are not knights, not nobles. They are farmers, shepherds, charcoal burners, tanners, fishermen, men whose lives have been shaped by hardship long before they ever lifted a weapon. But now, in the dim light of pre-dawn, they rise not as commoners, but as an army. Their hands are calloused, their shoulders knot with thick muscle, their fingers, permanently twisted from years of training, can pull a weapon few others in Europe can even string. For these men are longbowmen. They stand quietly in the cold, hundreds of them, then thousands, forming ranks that stretch across the misty valley floor. No shining armor, no decorated tunics, only simple linen, rough leather, and the unmistakable curve of the yew-wood bows they carry like extensions of their own bodies. The longbow is as tall as a man, sometimes taller, carved from a single stave of wood carefully chosen, shaped, seasoned, and reinforced by artisans who understand the tension hidden inside every living tree. To draw it requires extraordinary strength, not just brute force, but technique honed through years of practice. It is said that a longbowman's skeleton can be identified centuries after death simply by the warped bones of the arm and shoulder. Their craft leaves its mark deeper than any wound. And this morning, in the valley that soon will be remembered in chronicles, every longbowman stands ready, not trembling, not nervous. Ready. They have been prepared for this moment since childhood. The kings and nobles watching from horseback know this. They know the stakes, they know the reputation. But they also know that across the field, beyond the fog, stands the greatest military force assembled in generations, an army glittering with plate armor, shining shields, polished helmets, horses draped in steel and velvet. The enemy comes with banners high, trumpets blaring, hooves pounding like rolling thunder. They come with a confidence born from centuries of dominance. For heavy cavalry, the armored knight, has ruled the European battlefield since the age of Charlemagne. No man on foot, they believe, can challenge a wall of steel mounted on war horses that weigh half a ton. But the longbow does not fear steel. It ignores lineage. It does not kneel before titles. When the horns sound and the enemy cavalry begins its advance, the kings on both sides believe they already know how this day will unfold. They expect a dramatic clash, swords ringing, banners whipping through the wind. But the longbowmen know a different truth. They know what is about to happen. The command is given. A single word shouted across the ranks. Knock! The men lift their bows. Thousands of hands move in the same instant. Quivers rustle. Feathers brush fingertips. Then, draw. Every bow bends into a perfect arc, wood groaning under the stress. The air itself seems to tighten as dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of bowstrings stretch to their limits. And finally, loose. It is not one sound, it is many. A rolling, thunderous hiss as thousands of arrows leap into the sky at once. The archers do not watch them fly. They do not need to. They already know the mathematics of death. The arrows rise in a single dark wave, higher and higher, until they reach the cold morning sun, and then they fall, not individually, but as a living storm. The enemy cavalry continues its charge, unaware of just how quickly the world is about to change. The sky darkens, not with clouds, with death. The arrows land with horrifying efficiency. The first wave strikes horses, because a knight is nothing without the animal that carries him. Screams rip across the battlefield as steeds collapse, their armor no protection against the longbow's brutal force. The second wave comes before the commanders can even shout an order. Some arrows shatter against steel plates, yes, but others slip through visor slits, through arm openings, under helmets, between joints, through chainmail, into throats, armpits, faces. Armor becomes meaningless when the storm falls from above. The knightly advance falters, the formation breaks. The proud charge, once unstoppable, twists into a violent tangle of fallen men, dying horses, and shattered pride. But the longbowmen do not stop. They do not hesitate. They do not celebrate. They simply continue the rhythm that has been drilled into them since they could first lift a stick. Knock, draw, loose. Knock, draw, loose. Again and again, a mechanical, merciless cadence. Some archers shoot so quickly that their arrows land before their enemies even realize they've been hit. Others fire deliberately, picking targets with calm precision. Together they form an unbroken wall of noise, strings snapping, arrows hissing, men shouting, metal cracking. The sky rains death. The ground becomes a graveyard. The noble class of Europe, those who believed themselves chosen by God to rule the battlefield, now kneels in the mud, begging for mercy that will not come. Historians will one day call this a revolution, a turning point, the moment when common men shattered the power of armored nobility. But on this field, in this hour, the archers do not think of politics. They fight for survival, for wages, for their lord, for pride, for home. And above all else, they fight because the longbow is the only weapon that gives them equality against the mounted elite. By mid-afternoon, the enemy cavalry is broken. The field is yours. But the longbowmen remain in formation, silent as the wind sweeps across the dead. Their arms tremble, their shoulders ache. Some bleed from the fingers where bowstrings tore skin away. Yet not a single man complains, for this is what they were born and trained to do. Not kill kings, not topple empires, but prove, for one extraordinary moment in history, that the power of a nation could lie not in the hands of nobles, but in the calloused fingers of common men who had mastered the sky. On this day, the longbow is not just a weapon. It is the equalizer of Europe. The second of 10 medieval horrors so ruthless that it's a miracle anyone lived long enough to tell the tale. There are castles built to impress, castles built to protect, castles built to rule. And then there are castles built to kill. To understand the third terror of medieval warfare, we must step inside a fortress whose stones were arranged not for beauty, but for bloodshed, a place where every window, stairway, hallway, and doorway is part of a silent, deliberate trap. This is not a single castle, it is all of them. For the medieval fortress is, in truth, a machine designed to devour armies, and its gears begin turning the moment an enemy army appears on the horizon. The villagers flee first. Families gather what little they can carry, grain sacks, chickens, blankets, tools, and rush toward the castle gates. They cross the drawbridge trembling, clutching children, praying the defenders will let them inside. The guards shout orders, waving people through as quickly as possible. Behind them in the field, soldiers prepare for war. The great wooden gates slam shut. The portcullis falls with a heavy iron thud. Chains rattle as the drawbridge lifts, and the castle awakens. For most of human history, castles were not passive buildings. They were weapons as dangerous as any sword or spear. To assault a medieval fortress was to walk into a labyrinth built with a single purpose: to make sure you never leave. The enemy camps beyond the walls, confident. Their commanders boast that their siege towers will reach the battlements within days. Their rams, massive logs capped with iron, are ready to smash through any gate. Their ladders are polished, their armor gleaming, their torches wrapped in pitch. They have done this many times. They believe they know what awaits them. They are wrong. Inside the fortress, preparations unfold with clockwork precision. Archers take their positions behind narrow slits carved into the stone, openings so small that an arrow can fly out but none can fly in. The defenders have spent years memorizing the angles. They know exactly where the enemy will stand, exactly where they will run, exactly where they will die. Boiling oil? Rare. Too expensive. Boiling water? Common. Heated sand? Even worse. When heated for hours over glowing coals, sand becomes a deadly liquid that flows into armor joints, searing flesh instantly. Soldiers scream as the grains slip beneath their plates, tiny, inescapable, and unstoppable. The castle has many such devices: murder holes in the ceilings, machicolations jutting from the towers, hidden passages behind the walls, trapdoors that lead to sheer drops, corridors so narrow that only one man can pass at a time. This is not poor design, this is the point. Every inch of the fortress turns the attacker's numbers against him, for a siege is not won by bravery or strength. It is won by patience, time, hunger. The besieging army may arrive with 20,000 men, but within a week they have eaten through their supplies. Within 2 weeks, disease begins to spread. Within 3, the smell of their camp settles over the valley like a curse. But inside the castle, life continues. The granaries are full, the wells are deep. The people are protected. The garrison lives on stored wheat, dried beans, salted pork, fish, onions, root vegetables, food chosen not for taste, but for endurance. It can feed dozens, hundreds, sometimes thousands for months at a time. The besieger grows weaker with every passing day. The defenders grow more confident, and then the castle begins its counterattack. It starts subtly. Small raids launched at night through postern gates hidden behind thorn bushes or thick ivy. Silent archers slip into the darkness, shooting at sentries, sabotaging siege towers, setting fire to supply wagons. The attackers wake to confusion, shouting, chaos. They respond with rage, they charge the walls, and this is exactly what the defenders want. Because a charging army becomes a trapped army the moment it reaches the base of a medieval wall. The towers above curve in such a way that archers can fire directly downward onto enemies who have nowhere to run. Soldiers press in, crowding at the base, unable to attack, unable to flee. The castle has turned their numbers into a curse. Ladders go up, ladders fall. Bodies pile at the foot of the walls in grotesque heaps, but the worst is still hidden. For if the attackers manage to break through the gate, and some always do, they will find themselves inside a narrow stone tunnel that leads into the heart of the fortress. This passage is called the killing corridor. It is long, it is dark, it is lined with slits on both sides. Arrows pour through these slits from defenders who cannot be seen. Oil and sand rain from above. Stones drop from hidden ceiling vents. Spears thrust through gaps in the walls. The men trapped inside cannot fight, cannot advance, cannot retreat. The castle eats them alive. If by some miracle they reach the inner courtyard, they discover that the defenders have been waiting there all along, ready to strike them from every direction. A castle is not a home, not a palace, not a monument. It is a predatory creature, stone-skinned and iron-toothed, designed to turn whole armies into nothing more than broken armor and unmarked graves. Stories of such sieges spread across kingdoms, whispered by travelers, exaggerated by bards, immortalized by chroniclers. Some speak of castles that held out for 6 months, others for 3 years, a few for decades, but the lesson is always the same. If you march against a medieval fortress, you are not fighting its soldiers. You are fighting the fortress itself. And it does not forget, it does not fear, it does not forgive, it only waits. This was the third of 10 medieval terrors so deadly, so merciless, that it is astonishing any soldier survived long enough to see the next horror. Before gunpowder ruled the world, before cannons shattered the silence of kingdoms, before steel was folded into masterpieces that sang with every swing, there was one weapon that determined who lived, who ruled, and who vanished into the dirt of forgotten history. Not because it was the sharpest, not because it was the strongest, but because it was the most adaptable. It is the spear, humanity's first true weapon of war, refined through centuries until it became the medieval soldier's greatest equalizer. At first glance, it seems almost too simple. A pole of wood, a tip of metal, nothing more. Yet this unassuming shape shaped the fate of kings. To understand why, we must return to a time when armies collided like oceans crashing into each other, when battles were not won by single warriors, but by formations, shapes, geometry, discipline stronger than courage, and unity stronger than blood. The spear in medieval Europe was not a weapon, it was an idea, and this idea could stop horses. Picture it, dawn on a misty field somewhere in the Germanic lands. The ground trembles, the air vibrates, a wall of mounted knights, armored head to hoof, shining with silver and pride, charge forward with the unstoppable force of divine judgment. To face them is to face doom, unless you are part of the wall. The infantrymen stand shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping, spears angled outward like a forest of iron awaiting the storm. Their boots dig into the mud, their breath fogs the air, their knuckles whiten around the wooden shafts. They know what is coming. A war horse galloping at full speed is a living missile, and the knight upon it believes God himself rides with him. The cavalry charge was the thunderbolt of medieval warfare, terrifying, decisive, feared by every army in Europe. But then comes the moment, the split second that defines who survives. The cavalry thunders forward, the knights lower their lances, the infantry brace, and then impact. The first row of horses impales itself upon the spear wall. A sickening crack, a scream, man or beast, you cannot tell. The second row collapses onto the first. Knights tumble, crushed by their own momentum. The formation of infantry bends but does not break. The spear has defeated the most elite warriors in the world, and not because the infantry were stronger, but because they were unified. This is the true power of the spear. It transforms individuals into a single terrifying organism, a phalanx, a hedgehog, a living fortress. But the spear was no mere anti-cavalry tool. It changed shape for every battlefield. A foot soldier could thrust with it, stab with it, brace it, sweep it, entangle an enemy shield, deflect a sword, or pin a horse. A hunter could use it to take down boar or stag. A guard could use it to hold back intruders. Peasant rebellions could swarm knights with simple spears crafted overnight. Even kings feared the spear. Because while a sword required years of training, while a bow demanded strength and precision, while a mace required proximity and courage, a spear needed none of these. A farmer could become a soldier in a single afternoon. And when hundreds of them joined together, each man holding the same length of wood, the same angle, the same stance, they became something knights dreaded more than death. A formation that did not break. The Swiss proved this most brutally. In the Alpine valleys, where wealth was scarce and pride was abundant, men trained with pikes, massive spears twice the height of a man, until their formations moved like rivers of spikes. They marched in boxes, squares, hedges, bristling outward with lethal precision. Knights charged them, knights died, knights stopped charging. Because when a cavalryman approached the Swiss pike block, he did not face one spear. He faced dozens pointing directly at his throat. And behind those spears were men who had sworn to hold the line no matter what screamed toward them. As their fame grew, their pike formations began to shift the balance of power across Europe. Kingdoms hired them, rivals feared them. Generals rethought their tactics entirely. For the first time, foot soldiers, not nobles, could dominate a battlefield. The spear had rewritten the social order, but spears were not always so disciplined. In some places they became wild, unpredictable, born from desperation rather than strategy. In the Balkans, raiders wielded long spears with hooked tips to drag riders from horses. In Scandinavia, jarls and kings used heavy boar spears, tipped with crossbars to stop charging beasts and enemies. In the Slavic lands, long thrusting spears evolved into hybrid weapons, half spear and half scythe, capable of slicing as well as piercing. Wherever the spear appeared, it adapted to the culture, the terrain, the enemy. It was the most democratic weapon in the medieval world. Yet there was one more transformation, the most frightening of all. When armies fused hundreds of spear points into a single moving mass, they created something greater than a formation. They created a threat that could not be stopped by sheer force. A pike block marching downhill could crush infantry. A defensive spear wall could shatter cavalry. A ring of spears could protect against ambushes. A square of pikes could hold off armies 3 times its size. It was the closest thing the Middle Ages had to a tank. It changed battles. It changed kingdoms. It changed history. The spear, simple, ancient, unpretentious, was the quiet ruler of a violent world. It did not shine like a knight's sword. It did not roar like a catapult. It did not terrify like Greek fire. But it controlled the battlefield like nothing else. And that is why it stands among the 10 medieval weapons, so ruthless, so transformative, that it reshaped the destiny of Europe. Across medieval Europe, kings believed their walls would protect them. Stone towers rising like frozen giants, gatehouses carved with coats of arms, moats glittering under the sun. Merchants, nobles, and peasants alike placed their faith in these fortresses, believing that stone could stop destiny. But then came the machine that made cities tremble, a mountain of timber, a monster on wheels, a siege tower. And when it appeared on the horizon, every man on the walls knew. Their only hope was to pray it burned before it reached the gate. Yet more often than not, it didn't, because the siege tower was not merely a weapon. It was an ecosystem, a walking, creaking, groaning world of its own. Inside it, dozens of men marched upward through spiraling wooden corridors, climbing level by level until they reached its crown. Shields rattled against the interior walls, water barrels swayed on hooks, archers crouched at arrow slits carved into the sides. At the top, behind hinged shutters, armored warriors waited like wolves behind a door. From a distance, the tower looked slow. Up close, it looked inevitable. Let us travel to a besieged city somewhere in medieval France. The defenders have been staring at the thing for days. At first, they told themselves it would collapse or rot, or burn or fail, but each morning it stands closer. And each night, the sounds of carpenters echo across the plain, the hammering of iron bolts, the sharpening of axes, the creak of ropes thick as wrists. Like a living creature, the siege tower grows. The defenders unleash everything they have: stones, pitch, oil, even desperate fire arrows that streak into the sky like falling stars. But the attackers have planned for this. The tower is wrapped in rawhide soaked in water until they drip onto the ground below. Its timber frame is swollen with moisture. Fire sputters against it, powerless. The hides hiss like steam on hot metal. Then comes the horror. The tower begins to move. Dozens of men push from behind. Others pull with ropes. Every soldier inside braces as the behemoth lurches forward. With each groan of its wooden joints, the defenders feel the world shrinking. The walls they once trusted seem suddenly fragile. As the distance closes, the tower rises taller than the battlements, turning the defenders into prey trapped in the nests of their own city. Archers inside the tower open their shutters and unleash arrow storms downward, clearing the walls with mechanical cruelty. Defenders duck, flee, or fall screaming. Then the top of the tower tilts forward. A bridge, long, wide, reinforced, slams down onto the parapet. The invaders pour across it like a flood breaking a dam. And so begins the fight in the worst place imaginable. Narrow walkways, sheer drops, chaos on stone. A siege tower has only one purpose: to deliver soldiers directly onto the walls. And once it does, the battle is no longer fair. But the siege tower had a second life too, one far more terrifying. Sometimes it carried not only men, but smaller siege weapons. Imagine a structure as tall as a 5-story building, rolling toward your home, packed with archers, shieldmen, spearmen, and a small catapult or ballista, mounted on the upper levels, firing down into the heart of your city long before its bridge ever dropped. A fortress attacking a fortress. This was no longer war. It was engineering warfare. Medieval armies built towers that rivaled the height of city walls simply to reclaim the advantage of verticality. Whoever held the highest ground controlled the field, whether defender or attacker. Siege towers allowed invaders to steal that privilege, and they were used everywhere. Crusader armies, dragging towers across scorching Levantine sands, Ottoman forces, building massive rolling fortresses at Constantinople, English armies, pushing armored towers toward French strongholds, city militias, constructing counter-towers inside their walls to meet them head-on. Some towers were so large they required hundreds of men to move them. Some were built in pieces and assembled on site like deadly medieval flat-pack furniture. Some bristled with mantlets, shields, and giant wooden screens to protect the push teams below. Some were clad in iron plates, creating medieval juggernauts nearly impossible to destroy. And others were decoys, built not to reach the walls, but to frighten the defenders into exhausting their ammunition, keeping their eyes fixated on the wrong threat, while sappers dug tunnels beneath the foundations. The siege tower was more than wood, more than wheels, more than brute force. It was psychological warfare, a symbol that the enemy would not wait for negotiation, a promise that the walls, your last safety, were no longer enough, a message to every soul inside the city: your kingdom is ending. Prepare yourselves. But even towers fall. When defenders succeeded in burning one, the fire spread like a funeral pyre across the fields. Men trapped inside became silhouettes dancing in crimson light. The crackling of beams sounded like screams. The collapse shook the ground, and the survivors carried this memory for the rest of their lives. It is little wonder that medieval chronicles describe siege towers with the same dread as dragons and giants. They were the closest thing the Middle Ages had to monsters. And so, among the 10 medieval weapons so ruthless that it's a miracle anyone survived to tell the tale, the siege tower stands unmatched in scale, ambition, and psychological terror. For in a world of swords and shields, nothing was more horrifying than the sight of a moving fortress coming straight toward you.